All right, I'm coming to you with essentially a spoiler-free discussion of Star Drifter. This is a science fiction adventure game. This is version 1.3 from Ken Kennedy, who was kind enough to send me this game. It is a solitaire adventure game set in a fictional far-off galaxy. In this story game, no opponent is required. The book walks you through a series of events that are different each time you play the game. In these events, you, as a star drifter, will encounter all sorts of dangers in your quest to seek purpose and make your mark among the stars. This is basically volume 2 of what is a projected trilogy of Drifter games. The first one being The Drifter, that is a solo adventure set in the Wild West. I have done a video on that. You could see the link to that video up here. Star Drifter is number 2. And number 3, which I understand is currently being worked on, is, I think, called Adventure Drifter, but I'm not totally sure. That is a fantasy kind of version of this system. I say essentially spoiler free. I'm going to avoid most of this book here are events, and essentially this is, when it boils down to it, you roll some dice and you turn to an event and the event plays out. You make your choices and that puts together the adventure that you're having. So I don't want to show too many of the events, but I'm going to show maybe one or two just as part of my discussion of this game. The system as a whole, I think, is super successful. I played the Drifter and really enjoyed it, despite, as I said in that video, not even really loving, per se, the Wild West kind of theme, but the designer has found a genre in the Wild West and in sci-fi, certainly, where the lone traveler is just kind of very much in lockstep with thematic elements to Westerns and to certain types of sci-fi. And so that really carries it through. What you have in Star Drifter is the concept that you are a Star Drifter, you are a character, you do have a ship, and we're looking here, there's two different ways to do the character sheet and the ship sheet. This is the smaller version fitting on one piece of paper, or either a laminated card or a piece of paper, where you have your health, you're taking damage, and the stats that you have in the game go along and are matched to your health. For example, at full health with no damage, you have a prowess value of 4. And during the course of the game, you will have skill checks that will arise, and the skill checks will cause you to be rolling on tables after you add modifiers to a D10 roll, and the modifiers will be, in the case of a prowess check, for example, your prowess number, or the check might say prowess -2. So if your prowess at that point was 4, you would get a value of 2 to add on to whatever your D10 roll was, and then based on the difficulty of the check, you would look up what you got and you would get your pass or fail value. And that's the essential mechanic of the game. Combat works very similarly in that regard. You also have a value that is a mind value. You have money. You have destiny points that can be used to re-roll things, and I'm going to talk about that later in the video. Your goal in the game is to get 10 star points. At least that's the goal in the individual game. You can play as a campaign game where you just try to get as many as possible. But in a regular adventure, you're trying to get 10 points. You begin the game with a certain notoriety level. You can either roll or choose to decide how in effect kind of wanted by the law you are, and this is going to determine which of the event tables that you roll on. So for an easier game or events that are less perhaps combat centric, you would start out with low notoriety as a choice, which is what I chose to do for most of the games. Or you could give an optional roll and see what it was like to play out the higher notoriety and the kind of more pressure events, I guess is the way I could put it there. The ship works similarly to some extent. You have the values of hull damage as well as crew damage and the associated mobility value that you get. So if you are heavily damaged, your mobility is going to be under this type of star value when you are rolling for those checks, as opposed to this value when you have no hull damage. You have weapons, your cannons, and various thrusters that can be upgraded that will impact the movement through the world that you do. And this is your world here. You will be starting out at one of the hexes based on a die roll, and you are going to be exploring. And you know that these are colonized planets here. For those of you thinking that you wouldn't want to print something out with all that black ink, there is a low ink version of the same thing, which might actually be easier to even see on video. So there are colonized planets, but as you go through your story, you yourself are going to encounter, based on the events, things that become known as sectors of interest. So based on events that happen, you will locate something maybe perhaps far away. For example, a distress call for a ship that might be this many hexes away and you're over here, and you decide you're going to travel to that hex and figure out what is happening there. What is the distress call? And based on events that unfold, it may be any number of things, and any number of things may happen to you. As you travel, though, you have the possibility of encountering other events that will take you off course, that will impact you, that will bring you into contact with other NPCs, other ships that you may or may not have to fight. You could try to get away from them. This is how the story unfolds. This is how the game unfolds. In the course of your turn, you have these different actions that you can take. And basically, we talked about the flying action is just you're moving your ship to a new hex, and then you are doing a D100 roll to see on the table, based on your notoriety, what event then happens to you, and then you play out that event. You can also upgrade your weapons using a destiny point. You can try to repair your hull if you have hull damage, again, using a destiny point. Upgrade your thrusters, that is your sort of movement, with 2 destiny points, and you can upgrade your cannons. And then in certain hexes, for example, like the sector of interest, you will be rolling on something that will happen there based on where you are, or if you are in a spaceport, those are contained in these colonized planet hexes. Then you have some other options that you can do there. And for flying, you have, again, a little mini sequence of events. So you are checking off, you're using fuel while you're flying, you're moving your ship to an adjacent hex, you're rolling for the event, and then you're going to that event and seeing what happens. It's all very simply laid out here. In the spaceports, the colonized planets, you get there and you're going to be rolling a D10 to determine what is available to you in that spaceport. And it will possibly, there's a fueling station, there might be a medical bay, there could be a maintenance place, for example. And the book is very conveniently laid out, and the PDF, I think these would be active links, where if there's a fueling station there, it's going to tell you the exact paragraph number you need to go to figure out how to get that fueling station to work for you. So this is pointing you toward E158, for example. And as the story unfolds, you will be traveling, moving, having events. Travel, move, have an event. That's it. But the simplicity of that really does allow a deep story to evolve. And this is where I don't want to get too specific with what the events all are. But in this game, you could just see these are all the events that can possibly happen to you. And then within the events, we'll just randomly turn to this one here. So this is an event here. If we go to the spaceport shipyard, this actually is one of the events that could happen in a spaceport, there's a D10 roll, and it will give you options as to what to be able to do. there are individual events that would happen. So, for example, here's another spaceport event. You're docking your ship at a planet's orbital spaceport and you're looking for an android. This is obviously part of an ongoing story. And you have, again, a D10 roll and then options within that. If you really want to see what they are, I suppose you could pause the screen. I'm not going to dwell on them because I really don't want to give away too many different spoilers here. But most of the events here give you a sub-table, a sub-D10 table that has different options and different outcomes, and in certain cases, different tests to take with a pass or a fail outcome, and that is going to then lead you in a different direction. I would say for those of you that have played the Drifter, the Wild West version of this, the Star Drifter has more player agency in a sense, because for the events that happen, at least it seems to me, based on what the plays that I've done so far, there's more random things that are outcomes within the events, and then of those outcomes, sort of branching choices for you to make. So you are kind of managing your mini little adventure in the sense of at a certain point you're going to find something that is going to lead you in a travel direction. So you're going to have a mini goal of traveling this many hexes away to get to this point of interest. And then along the way, other things will happen. Perhaps you'll hear that there is another distress call. You have a choice. Do I follow that distress call and try to help, or do I continue on my way? And depending on what choice you make, you will either have an outcome of that choice, or you will be instructed to roll on a new event and see what happens there. So that is, again, it's a very similar mechanic to Barbarian Prince, similar in a good way to Barbarian Prince and some other games that are created through a series of random events, decisions that you make, and then the management of, in this case, you've got your fuel that you're managing, and you do have these destiny points that you can use. And this is where I said I would get back to discussing that. In the very first game that I played, I forgot that I had the destiny points, which can allow for rerolls. And the game ended relatively quickly with a situation where I was investigating something that blew up, and it took me and my ship with it. It was over. I realized, though, that I could have used a destiny point to re-roll that outcome and perhaps not have ended the game there. But I felt, even though I had forgotten I had the destiny point, I'm not sure I would have wanted to use it in that way, because it didn't really fit thematically with taking away that dramatic and bad a narrative outcome. So there was something there with the destiny points that I thought, if the rule itself was, it says here, a destiny point can also be used to re-roll any roll you make throughout the game, but you must keep the second result. To me, I'd like to see that rule perhaps revised a little bit to give the player even more choice and to make it harder to figure out to use, rather than re-rolling something where, something has spectacularly blown up in front of you and you're dead. Before you get to a very risky situation, you assign a destiny point and say, I'm going to use a destiny point here, and then do your roll. And if you don't use it, you lose it. If you have assigned it, then you could stop what already happened and re-roll, hopefully getting a different outcome. That, to me, I think is how I'm going to continue to play, because it makes it a little bit harder. It makes it a little bit riskier, and it makes it, it's space. You could die, but yet it seemed like just giving too much player agency to kind of undo something as spectacular as you were, tracking something down and then it just blew up in front of you. I think that's part of that's part of the excitement and the tension of this game. And I think having more of the destiny point functioning as like a choice element is something that I would try to do a little bit differently. The only other thing about this, at least in the physical version, that I don't love is the way the events themselves are numbered here on the side, because you don't really want to be looking through the names of them. I don't want to know there's a disc combat tournament that might happen, or there is galactic competition that might happen. I'd like to be surprised as much as possible. And for that, I wish the numbers were actually just referring to the actual number on the page, or a series of numbers on the page, so I could just look at the top and not have to see accidentally, oh, look, there's an android bounty somewhere in the game that I might encounter. I don't want to know that. I don't want to know that. So that's something that I would have preferred for at least the physical version. The PDF version, you are presumably clicking. I don't have it, but I'm assuming you're clicking around and you're not seeing those. So you are preserving more of the mystery in that way using the PDF version. So I think Space Drifter, again, thematically, to be a lone explorer and to be at the edge of knowledge of things. Things will unfold as you travel. As you are going through the far reaches of space, you will be set on a course and something will happen and it will be calling you in another way. And you making the decision about whether or not you're going to heed that call plays a big role in how the stories unfold. And I think that is just a super successful use of theme with a very simple game mechanic. So I would say, if you liked the Drifter and you like this type of game, unless you really don't like the space theme, this is a must, because in a sense, it takes what the Drifter did, and I think it gives even more. There's more player agency. There's a richness. I don't know whether there are actually more events, but there are more choices within the events that happen. So in that regard, there are more branches to the story here in Star Drifter. And if you liked the idea of the Drifter, but weren't really into the West, into that theme, but you like space, this is definitely something you should look into, because I think you'd be very happy with it. And even just down to the aesthetics, the black and white aesthetics really work, and the way the player sheets are devised, it kind of feels like a little technical manual thing that you have in front of you that you're managing. It all comes together to give a very thematic and story-driven experience that is so involving that when I was playing it, somebody walked into the room and really startled me, because I was that involved in the story. And ultimately, that's really what I'm looking for when I play games like this.